So I was going to make this video about just boss fights, because those are the ones I see the most struggle with on all the forums and stuff, but a recent event happened where I was playtesting a new class with Ronald, and, we kinda got beat up very hard. And so I want to make this guide as both a dissection of that fight, and also an explanation of what tactics you can employ to help you win your very difficult encounters within this game. Now, step one is going to sound very, very obvious, but know what your character can do. And that sounds incredibly stupid simple, but it's a big deal. Like, we were playing at level 7 with characters we weren't familiar with. I was controlling 2 characters of a class that just had the playtest come out using radically different feats for both of them. And I didn't know its play pattern yet, so as such, it was a little bit rough. I misunderstood some of the terminology between transcendence and basically what was a passive and what was an active, and it caused a few issues. It didn't actually swing the fight in any way, but there are also issues with our spellcaster thinking that fascinated meant that none of us could attack it or else the entire spell would fall off, and things of that nature were happening in that fight. So step one, just to make sure that we are clear, understand your character's abilities. If your weapon has a trait, think about how you're actually going to use that trait. So if you're playing a Great Axe character, you're going to want to think about, okay, how can I actually use my sweep in this encounter? How can I actually use the tools the game has provided me? Because Pathfinder will expect you to use every single tool you have available in these harder difficulty fights. And this next point really matters for turn 1, because turn 1 is the most impactful turn to fight. Because if you can get something moving right at turn 1, it can become very, very difficult for that momentum to stop. And I'll explain why in a later tip, but for this one, I'm just going to say, having enemies be forced to come to you is super powerful. Because if an enemy is coming over to you, and all of you are ready for it, you get basically an entire turn advantage because they're spending 2 actions to move closer to you. They only have 1 action left. Then your entire party gets 3 actions before they get to their next turn. Or if you're running at them, well, then the reverse happens. Editing string upper here, I'm just going to mention that there are some pretty long-range spells even in the cantrip section, so you can pretty frequently have range advantage in terms of how much you can threaten a lot of the time. So you can actually force enemies to come to you a lot of the time. And if you are actually thinking about it, you can get a lot of mileage out of it. Now, against swarm encounters, this may mean your melee characters will need to delay until the first one arrives so that they can start wailing on them. But that is just like a minor downside compared to not needing to spend actions to move into melee and then being far away from the spellcasters for spellcasters to also walk up to support you. Delay is something that everybody should be aware of and be thinking about how to use because it is super useful when you have that range advantage. And of course it has its extra action ready, which is more useful in a boss fight scenario where you want to force the boss to come over to you and you still want to make an attack without losing an entire turn effectively. So yeah, that's my recommendation. And early on, that could be the difference between your wizard or bard setting up a slow on the big bad or that not happening, which is a massive deal. And this goes to my next point. You will want to attack the action economy as hard as you can. In an encounter with a lot of guys, this means killing off guys. So that way the enemy loses offensive power. And if you look at the encounter building, not all creatures are treated equally. Higher level creatures are worth more XP and have more offensive potency. And I like to think of it in terms of XP thresholds and how much XP of threat is this creature representing. So like, if you were a level 3 party and there is just like a level 0 orc, that guy's only representing 10 XP worth of threat. Where something like a level 7 demon of some kind would be representing 160 XP of threat. And thus, if you could choose between the two of them, you'd choose to eliminate the demon, obviously, but You don't want to leave a bunch of orcs up as you're dealing with the main threat, because that just gives the enemy side a lot more actions and a lot more pressure they can apply to you. And if you're able to eliminate some of those smaller minions, the rest of the encounter shifts down in difficulty. So that is why people say focus firing is so important. And that's why I also really like the area damage spells, because those have a chance to remove a few things from action economy all at once, or help you in clearing up the little guys. And that's really the point of damage, is to make it so that enemies cannot act forever. Killing them. Just killing them. And if you watched my previous video on the purpose of damage, you would definitely know that I think damage is simply just filling the progress bar to the point where you win the fight. And I said that in the encounters with a lot of minions, there are thresholds where the fight becomes easier, and that's still true. And we should have known that, and mind you, there were a lot of enemies coming at us. We did manage to kill one of them, but we were surrounded by a bunch of guys with attack of opportunity, so we couldn't really move freely. The Exemplar class is pretty action-intensive, particularly if you fail to predict where you need to have your Spark of Divinity in which icon. So it was very, very tough for us to get a foothold to do anything. As such, we had a lot of issues, and we couldn't do that focus fire because of how many reactions were threatening onto us. Ending Swing Ripper here, I just want to clarify that when I mention the creatures threatening far too much, I mean these multiple opportunities abilities that both the Hydra and the Chimera had. The Hydra is the biggest offender because it had 5 heads and we did not have the damage type variety to actually deal with the heads. So it was just constantly threatening 5 attacks of opportunity. It could still only use once per trigger, as is the rules with reactions, but when you're already heavily injured in a fight, you can't afford that kind of HP loss, because then you'll just get knocked out on your turn, and then they get to spend their turn full killing you. So, yeah, was not fun to get surrounded by a bunch of things with reach attacks of opportunity, because all the things also had reach, and if that wasn't true, again, might have had a better shot. But if you can, there is an idea of baiting out these reactions. And that is basically, you have a character with a lot of HP, a lot of AC, maybe even a feat like the Monk one that gives you a bonus to AC as you're running against attacks opportunities and other things that are triggered by movement. And you just run past the enemies to see if they have attack of opportunity, and provoke it if they do, so that way your squishies can get out freely. Mind you, you shouldn't just be provoking things willy-nilly, because that does kind of give them an extra action. But if they're throwing that action to your Monk, who has the highest AC in your party, and also has a +4 bonus because they're moving, that seems pretty good. I could even argue that the Monk feat that gives you +4 AC when moving is better than Rogue's equivalent of mobility, which gives you no attack or opportunity trigger if you move half your speed or less. Simply because the idea of baiting. You can bait with the Monk where you can't with the Rogue. And that's just another thing to consider in these more difficult fights. We, again, couldn't do that because there was a Chimera and a Hydra. 2 creatures with have attack of opportunity per head. We physically did not have enough party members to bail out all those reactions. In that previous video, I also mentioned how powerful things like Trip are against bosses with low reflex. Achilles had a shield augment that would let his shield trip, and I didn't trip. I wanted to use the weapon icon and use some activated abilities on that to deny healing and other things, but would have been better for me to trip. I don't think it would have changed anything, but it would have been better for me to trip and have that idea in my mind. Again, I have to think about what tools I have available, not just focus on what my class has given me. I wasn't fully using my equipment to the best of its potential. And that's a major reason to why we lost. But of course, I think I should talk about the real reason why we lost, and that was the environment around where the fight took place. Because those who are on the stream would know how much we hated this goddamn 10-foot cliff. Putting it up on screen now. You see that line right there? That was a cliff that was 10 feet high. That was it. That's why we lost. A simple 10-foot cliff, a basic environmental hazard, and we just couldn't do anything. That was it. No counterplay, no anything, just 10-foot cliff. Good game. Shake my hand. Now, that should sound really, really silly, because it is. But it legitimately split up the party, made us waste those actions on turn 1. We couldn't do my tip number 1 because the party was already separated. And when the enemies came over to us, they came over to a split party, and we need to waste actions to get up to them, maybe eat attacks or opportunities to get up to them. The bard couldn't see anyone, so our healer was out of commission. He couldn't debuff anyone. Nothing could happen. We couldn't get anything moving right there from turn 1, and the enemies basically got an extra turn on us. And the marshal was just kind of standing up on this cliff, not being able to go away because all of the attacks of opportunity that were unbaitable, as we were fired at from range by Medusa as well. And that was that. There was no ability to move out of the AoEs. There was no ability to do much of anything because of that cliff. Unless we figured out very, very early what was happening, left Wukong to die, and then came down the cliff to reset neutral, and then just taken the extreme fight with Wukong on the ground dying. I do not blame us for not seeing that line at the time, because that is an absurd line to try and see and go for. But that's my thoughts on that, and maybe there's something helpful for you as well, in how you can approach your own fights. And also, while I have you here on this end screen, I just want to give you a little bit of note that I'm going to be moving to college soon, which means my upload schedule will be all over the place for a while. So, if you don't hear from me for a week, that's why. I'm going to still try to upload, but do not expect several uploads a week going forward until another break happens.